This is TMI with your host, Dave Archer.
Hello, Mr. Archer.
Yeah.
How are you?
Let's see what he does with Guam. He does something in Guam. It will be an event the likes of which nobody's seen before. What will happen in North Korea?
And when you say that, what do you mean?
You'll see. You'll see. And he'll see.
Is that
He will see. It's not a dare. It's a statement. Has nothing to do with dare. That's a statement. He's not going to go around threatening Guam, and he's not going to threaten the United States, and he's not going to threaten Japan, and he's not going to threaten South Korea. No, that's not a dare, as you say. That is a statement of fact. The people that were questioning that statement, was it too tough? Maybe it wasn't tough enough. They've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough. If North Korea does anything in terms of even thinking about attack of anybody that we love or we represent or our allies or us, they can be very, very nervous. I'll tell you what, and they should be very nervous because things will happen to them like they never thought possible.
This has been a weird week, as every week now in the Trump era is. Escalation with the North Korean. What is this Manafort thing? His house got raided this week. FBI went into his house.
Oh, FBI.
And seized document as part of an order from Mueller's investigation of the Russian spy scandal.
Okay, yeah. I think they're missing some china from the last party that they had, and for some reason that china was Manafort's place. I don't know. Was Deng Xiaoping's body there?
What's the Chinese connection you're mentioning?
Because China doesn't seem to be pulling its weight with the whole North Korea thing. And I don't know. My lame attempt at humor there. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I picked up this week's Economist and this week's, I've never heard of this magazine before, The New Republic. I have no idea what it is. But the front cover of it was The New Republic Married to the Mob. It's an investigative article on what Trump owes the Russian mafia. It's an American publication out of Manhattan, and so I've just started reading it, and how the investigative journalist has been able to trace back Trump's casino and towers and condominiums, and how the Russian mafia started in 1987. Yeah. Trump made his first trip to Russia in 1987, only a few years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. He had been invited by Ambassador Yuri Debinin, and he had an all-expenses trip paid to Moscow and Leningrad. And it even refers to the art of the deal, where Trump had reversed the trip as well. And he wanted to build a luxury hotel across from the street from the Kremlin. And how Donald Trump Jr. says, and I quote, pretty disproportionate a cross-section of a lot of our assets. We see a lot of our money pouring in from Russia, end quote. So, I think this is probably why Trump has been really reluctant, and again, this is only hearsay, why he's been really reluctant on showing his taxes from all his businesses, because they're going to show that he's been either he either knew, or he plausible deniability. He had no idea that his casinos and his businesses were being used for laundering money, and that apparently right below Trump's suite in New York City And at the Trump Tower, there was a suite owned by one of these Russian guys, and it was a high-stakes casino, online casino that they were running out of this condo at Trump Towers. So they had purchased 5 or 6 condos in his place in Manhattan, Fifth Avenue. So, yeah, it's interesting. The stench is quite overwhelming, and smells like there's a factory pig farm coming out of Trump Towers.
It's supposedly a big deal to get a judge to let you search a home as opposed to offices or, yeah. So the thinkology is that they really had something because they would have had to convince a judge. And, this isn't just anybody. This is a famous American's house that you're going into.
So do you remember the movie Wag the Dog?
Yeah.
Robert De Niro's character, he was the guy, and Anne Hathaway, and they're talking to Dustin Hoffman, and they say, this is a movie I got to get on Blu-ray, that, you create a fake war to distract, and that's what they did with the character, or whatever her name was now, I can't remember, and they created a fake war in some fake Stan country of the little girl running, with the dog or the cat or the baby in her arms or whatever, and the fake bombs and all this stuff that they created, and then they murdered Dustin Hoffman's character at the end of the movie because he knew too much. This is what I think is happening now with this whole North Korea thing.
Yeah.
They're not gonna have a war with North Korea. They can, South Korea is one of the largest economies in the world next to China. They're not. Too many American interests are going to be disrupted. I mean, Apple is an $843 billion company.
If I follow what you're saying, you're suggesting that the North Korean nuclear standoff is a way to distract the public's attention away from the controversy.
Yeah, most definitely.
Of the Russian investigation.
Yeah.
So Kim doesn't realize that he's being used to distract public attention?
He's being used. He gets it.
Why is he doing this favor for Trump?
It's all about money, man. Somewhere, some way, somehow, it's money. Just follow the money. Whether it be, technology, whether it be, storing nuclear waste or some sort of chemical waste or
it's
something.
It's kind of known by the Americans that nothing supports a dictator more than having them give the finger to the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a commodity worth more than money itself.
Yeah, there you go.
So Trump gives that to Kim, and Kim gives Trump a distraction. And we're going to come back to the kind of, I think during the Clinton years, they made a deal with North Korea that paid North Korea pretty handsomely to cool
Follow the money, baby. Follow the money. Follow the money. Everybody walks away with what they want, and China has their cheap labor from North Korea. Russia has its cheap labor from North Korea.
But
Vladivostok
here's the thing. The level of distraction that's going to be created by this diversion away from the Russian investigation. The Russian investigation is so well entrenched that I think that this just being a war of words with North Korea isn't enough. I think that a missile has to be exchanged before this becomes loud enough to drown out the Russian investigation.
It'll never be allowed to escalate to the point of where they're trading, high velocity missiles. Downtown Seoul is 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers from the DMZ. It's not going to happen, man. It's not going to happen. The fact that Kim wants to launch a bunch of missiles, 5 or 6 missiles at Guam? It's not going to happen. Within 20 to 30 kilometers of the shore, man, they're already violating international treaties from the UN with respect to the 200-mile zone that each country has. Like China has totally violated that with their expansions to the South China Seas. North Korea is not going to be able to get away with that with Guam. You know, that they're going within, 170 kilometers or 170 miles of their sovereignty zone for the United States, for the island of Guam. So they're violating a major treaty with the United States right there on sovereignty rights, and territorial rights. So they're not going to be launching something to land within 30 miles. I mean, that's the same distance between downtown Toronto and Mississauga's town center. From where you are, that's about 30 miles. There's no way. There's no way. There's no way. No way.
So,
no way.
In nuclear news, beside that, plutonium detected in the air around the Hanford site in Washington State. An incredible article in Vanity Fair talking about the DOE, the money wasted, the political forces, and the types and quantities of waste stored and swept under the carpet, quite literally, at Hanford, right next to the Columbia River.
Surprised why there's so much cancer has gone up over the years in the western United States, not only because of the nuclear tests, but also because of what's pumped out of Hanford.
It's Hanford.
Or Hanford, pardon me. Yeah, Hanford.
Hanford. Hanford.
Yeah, F-O-R-D, yes.
So I broken record here. If the nuclear industry is so safe, why worry about North Korea? And I expand. Is it the dirty materials, the enriched uranium, the plutonium extracted from the spent fuel?
All of the above? All of the above. I think would be a fair assessment. How many years do we have to keep on, between the Yucca Mountain or whatever it's called, the storage facility to Hanford?
Well, they spent billions of dollars investigating the feasibility of the Yucca Mountain.
Yeah.
It was put to rest, NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah.
And Trump has just given them a pile of money to reopen that whole investigation. It's around $100 billion. When last those numbers were crunched, and it's always difficult to figure out what those billions mean in today or yesterday's dollars, and there's always a lag time between the calculation and the report released to the public. But 92 was the number, so calling it 100 billion to operate and load the Yucca Mountain proposed nuclear storage site puts a price tag on nuclear spent fuel. And that's just nuclear spent fuel. That's none of the stuff from Hanford. Here's the interesting thing is that it was Jimmy Carter who passed a law in the United States in 1979, wherein it was obvious that corporations weren't going to take responsibility for the spent fuel. So the American government assumed possession and ownership of it, with intent to remove it from those properties, but there it sat. That's why all these nuclear power plants, or at least the BWRs, have all their spent fuel from the last decade stored on site or on the roof of the plant itself. And it just sits there because there's no actual policy. So what they did was they implemented a rule that ratepayers, through the utilities, would contribute in the cost of their electricity for decades to a fund, which last I heard had accrued $30 to $35 billion to pay for spent fuel. But even the Yucca Mountain DOE estimate I cited before was 92, and it's probably more like 500 billion. So you can see they've saved up $30 billion. That's just sitting there, accruing interest.
I was just going to say, yeah, exactly.
Well, and then you know how money's leveraged. So even though there's $30 billion, theoretically, does it exist? What if the power company goes bankrupt? You know that money's just going to disappear. In the end, in every conceivable way, it's always the taxpayer who's going to be on the hook. The article...
It's a fait accompli.
Just to give you a taste of this article in Vanity Fair.
This is the September issue of Vanity Fair, correct?
This is Vanity Fair, dude. You're so L7, man. Let me do this. I don't know why you're killing the recording here. Hanford turns out to be a good example of American impulse to avoid knowledge that conflicts with whatever your narrow short-term interests might be. What we know about Hanford, we know mainly from whistleblowers who worked inside the nuclear facility, who have been ostracized by the community for threatening industry. Each tank contains its own particular slew of chemicals. When you contain most forms of nuclear materials, they release gases because you're the first person to admit, I don't know what the banging in the background is, you're the first person to admit that when that nuclear waste degrades,
Yeah.
and when that happens, it's making other chemicals and its daughter isotopes, and hydrogen, tritium, hydrogen. Well, that pressure builds up. So after 100 years, the pressure in that canister, if you're promising to seal it, will explode. And it's like, that's grade 9 nuclear physics. Anyone knows that. So that means this whole idea, just conceptually, of taking any kind of nuclear waste, sealing it in a container, and then putting it somewhere you can't manage it. How do you vent and monitor the off-gassing? See, so right there, half of all these nuclear waste plans that's why it's really interesting and sneaky in the pamphlet for the proposed deep geological repository beside Lake Huron. In the brochure, in the first paragraph, they admit that with the hydrostatic pressure of the water in the local rock at 600 meters, the caverns will crush the containers. So, containment.
It was a misnomer.
Right in the first...
It's a misnomer.
Well, they're not even pretending.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of sense of impunity, like they're not even pretending that they'll contain it for more than 100 or 200 years, that they're saying the caverns will crush the contents of the spent repository. Anyway, the point about this, so at Hanford, there's a slew of chemicals. At the top of many tanks accumulates hydrogen gas, which if not vented might cause the tank to explode. There are Fukushima-level events that could happen at any moment, says the author. People who created plutonium for the first bombs in the 1940s and early 50s are understandably in too much of a rush to worry about what might happen afterward. They simply dumped 120 million gallons of high-level nuclear waste and another 444 billion gallons of contaminated liquid into the ground. They then piled uranium with a half-life of 4.5 billion years into unlined pits near the Columbia River. They dug 42 miles of trenches to dispose of solid radioactive waste and left no good records of what's in the trenches. In early May of this year, a tunnel at Hanford built in the 1950s to bury low-level waste collapsed.
Lovely.
This is all beside the Columbia River. Anyway, this article speaks mostly about the politics and the management of the DOE and sort of the historic, short-sighted, priority-based decision-making, with never any look forward to what do we do 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years from now. Anyone who tackles this problem right now is going to have to spend so much money and divert so much resources to it that they won't survive the blowback from that.
Okay.
Therefore, no politician will ever take this on.
Well, it's kind of toxic for a politician, pun intended. I recall when Google Earth first came out, and I think you and I were on the phone. I think we were both alarmed at the river plain, the delta system that was in and around the complex, and the meandering S-snake kind of geography that the Columbia River had going by there. And I think we both remarked, how in God's name were they going to keep the groundwater from not saturating into those chambers? And you had, from your perspective, from a maths perspective, how is this not going to affect the tunnel system and everything else there? Because, basically you had all these fault zones running nearby, and, with the mountains and the Juan de Fuca Wanda Fuca, fault line and all the other fault lines that were running nearby, that this was just a bloody unmitigated disaster waiting to happen. And,
we'll put the link to the Vanity Fair article in the show description. Pilot and co-pilot.
Yeah, that'd be good.
With airplane sounds.
Ding, ding.
Flicking switches.
This is your pilot speaking. We seem to have encountered a mushroom cloud over the island of Guam. Please fasten your seatbelts. Yeah, last time I heard about Trudeau, he was vacationing out in British Columbia.
Huh.
You know, I think he wanted some fresh, fried salmon or something like that. We weren't too sure where he was.
Where is his constituency? Is it in Ottawa?
Mount Royal, I think it is, or Westmount in Montreal, downtown Montreal. Okay, next. Moose on the loose. Bloody hell. I mean, we had a moose at Herdman Station. I mean, who would have thought that, a couple of minutes from downtown. What's that?
It's a subway station?
Yeah, that's a subway station.
There's
it's
a moose.
Going to be a subway station sooner or later.
Okay.
But there was a moose there a few years ago, just after I moved here. And he just swam out of the river, and there was a big thing of wild grass, and this young moose was just chomping away next to the future,
This
LRT
was a couple
station.
of years ago?
No, this was like a couple of decades ago when I first moved here.
No.
But I'll never forget that. I mean a moose.
So you're telling a 10-year-old story.
I know, but it's
Next.
still... okay, next. Wild turkeys on buildings in downtown Ottawa. I mean, you'd think that they were talking about the politicians on Parliament Hill, but no. These wild turkeys flew in, and earlier on this spring.
Okay, now I know better. When was that?
The spring.
Okay.
Yeah. And these wild turkeys were migrating, and they were downtown, right near the Parliament LRT station, and these wild turkeys were holding up traffic. And again, we thought they were politicians, but nope. You look at the pictures online, wild turkeys on the top of these office towers, and you're in Ottawa when the nation's capital, wild turkeys are taking over. So, that's pretty much about it. So, as far as Ottawa is concerned. Other than that, we're in lazy, hazy days of summer, my friend.
The F-35.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Are we still buying those?
Well, see, here's the interesting thing about the F-35. Since Bombardier has been getting billions of dollars in subsidies, Lockheed Martin, who are supplying was it Lockheed Martin or Boeing? One of the two is supplying us with the future F-18 Super Hornets.
Mm-hmm.
I guess these are like little Hornets with, souped up on some sort of wild drug that's been banned from the Olympics. And so the builders of the F-35 have said, oh, well, hell, since this company is suing you under NAFTA because Bombardier is getting subsidies, we'll loan you the F-35s.
Really?
Yeah. So now they're...
Sounds like they've made too many already.
Yep. So now they're being really nice and saying that they're going to loan us a bunch of F-35s until this lawsuit between...
Now, here's something. They're both coming essentially from America.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference whether we get F-35s or continue with the F-18s?
Mm-hmm. Follow the money.
And I'll bet you it's a lot of the same companies.
Thank Thank you for listening to TMI with your host Dave Archer and co-host Ian Stolberg.
I love how if you slow it down, it sounds like you didn't ruin it.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to TMI with your host Dave Archer and co-host Ian Stolberg from Ottawa. This episode has been brought to you by the Price-Anderson Act. TMI can be heard on the web at Lisbon. We are on Google Play. We're also on SoundCloud. You can find us on Stitcher and rate and review us on iTunes. You can get a hold of us also at The Archer on Twitter, and TMI can also be reached via the email at archer@twxnet.com.
At that Archer. Say